Article, and I'm putting you guys collectively together. I know this kind of intermingled articles, so we will go to Article 12. And this is sponsored by the fire chief. See if the town meeting will vote to appropriate $35,850 from general fund revenues for the purchase of personal protective turnout gear for the fire rescue department. I'll remind the board, and I know I had forgotten because I was away, we had already approved what was the first half of this total purchase back, I think it was a special town meeting at the end of March that I had to miss. I know I had to reach out to Ed to confirm that. So this was actually an expected article from the fire chief. Chief Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the rest of the committee. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. This is phase 2 of a 2-part project. We purchased the first half of the second set of turnout gear at the special town meeting in March. This money would appropriate the remaining 17 sets of gear needed for the department.
Okay, any comments, questions? Kevin?
What's the average life expectancy for a set of turnout gear?
10 years, sir.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Motion to recommend.
For the second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So voted. Thank you. Okay, Article 13. Also sponsored by the fire chief. See if town meeting will vote to appropriate $8,382.30 from the ambulance reserve for appropriations for purchase of ballistic protection for the fire rescue department. I did watch your comments on this on Monday night, Chief. It is kind of a sad state that we need to go to this length on it. Your comments?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Massachusetts has put out some new response guidance for fire and EMS personnel that are responding to hostile events. It calls for fire and EMS training in what's called a force protection group, that in the event of a hostile event, where there were critically injured victims still in that location, that EMS personnel would enter into a warm or a hot zone under the protection of law enforcement, armed law enforcement, to extract those victims. That's really the new expectation. I shouldn't say the new expectation, but that's the expectation, is that they would be attempted to be rapidly extricated instead of waiting for the event to be over. So this article would equip the department with 10 ballistic vests of various sizes to be distributed onto the ambulance and the fire truck. And it's enough, with 2 spares to equip the on-duty group. And this would provide us the same level of ballistic protection that the police officers currently have.
Okay. My only question, I'm going to go first this time. Did this guidance from the state come too late for this to be part of your normal budget process? I mean, to me, this is something that normally should be discussed within the budget confines.
Sure, that's a good question. This guidance came out this past April of 17. The new guidance document came out. Because of the amount with the 10 sets that I'm looking for at the $8,000, it wasn't going to qualify for a capital expense anyway, because it was under $10,000, and because the funding source was going to be ambulance receipts. I felt instead of waiting, it was appropriate to just deal with it in the fall instead of waiting an additional time period to get the equipment.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Kim, question?
Steve, are these the same kind of vests that a police officer would use, or are they something that would go over uniforms?
Goes over a uniform. Yeah, the intent of this protection is not for on-duty members to be wearing this under their uniform or all the time. These would be pulled out during a hostile event, during some type of violent intruder incident where we had to form one of these rescue task forces to go in to try to make an entry with police. They would be donned over the uniform and secured.
Like a SWAT raid vest kind of thing?
Yes.
All secure?
Mm-hmm.
Kevin?
Thank you.
Chief, again, what's the life expectancy on these vests?
5 years.
Okay. And are these, I guess, are these the rifle type vests that go over? Are these rifle plates that are in them? Are these flexible Kevlar?
So they're flexible Kevlar level 3, and the guidance was not to go to a level 4 with side protection and plates just because of the, sort of the flexibility that the EMS would need to provide. SWAT teams wear level 4. The guidance for fire and EMS personnel was essentially the same as a duty officer, level 3, because they were under armed protection. The level 4 was just much heavier, as I'm sure you know, much heavier, especially with the side plates. It sort of limits movement. So the recommendation is for level 3.
And just one final thing. So you said the guidance that has come out, is this best practice guidance, or is this these aren't no new OEMS regulations requiring?
That is correct. These are not regulations. This is not law. The International Association of Fire Chiefs, the Professional Firefighters in Massachusetts, and then here locally in Massachusetts, the Department of Fire Services, as well as the Metropolitan Police Chiefs, the city chiefs, they came up with a guidance document for Massachusetts in terms of how law enforcement and fire and rescue should be working together in terms of an active threat. So they were recommendations that came out of that document.
And just considerations for 5 years is, will this be a future budget item as that 5-year mark comes along, or are you going to try and stagger them so it's not as big a hit to replace them? And considerations for, they're not, vests are typically not very water or sweat friendly. How are these things going to be stored? And
yeah, so they're going to be stored in a bag, in a protective bag in the vehicles. So again, we're probably going to be a little better on the sweat factor because they're not going to be worn, by personnel every day, but they will be in protective bags in the apparatus. And then again, I think in terms of what the future capital is, it's going to really depend on what where the price is in 5 years. If the expense 5 years from now is over $10,000, then it's going to need to be built into the capital, but because it's an EMS related item, the plan would probably be the same exact that we're doing now, is that the appropriation would just come from ambulance receipts.
And these for ambulance receipts towards a medically...
For a medical use, yeah. These vests will actually have medical pouches on them for tourniquets, quick clot. It's all trauma-related stuff that's right on the front of the EMS vest. So, yeah, the plan would be, if it's over $10,000 in 5 years, it would be included in the capital. If the price, for some reason, which I highly doubt, was still under $10,000 5 years from now, I would probably just recommend to handle it the same way, just an outside article under ambulance receipts.
Thank you.
All set, Kev? Yeah. Good. Any other questions?
Motion to recommend.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So voted. Thank you. Okay, Article 14. This is both sponsored by the Fire Chief and Police Chief. Chief Lucas is here. Good to see you. See if town meeting will vote to appropriate the sum of $150,000 from free cash to hire an outside consultant to study and evaluate the existing public safety buildings, including police and fire, and to make recommendations on the feasibility of renovation, expansion, or the construction of separate fire and police station buildings, or a joint public safety complex, or a combination of both. Eddie had provided some information to us on this, which I think we all would have had a chance on this. I know, Chief Coleman, you gave a kind of a brief overview. Maybe it wasn't brief to the Board of Selectmen. If you'd like to give us just something brief on the expectation of this study.
Sure, absolutely, Mr. Chairman. If you recall, when I presented my budget this past spring, Mrs. Kavanaugh actually asked the question, how are the facilities? How are the facilities doing? And my answer at that time were, the stations are in good shape. General maintenance is being done. Our staff takes a tremendous amount of pride in the building, so when things break, they're fixed. But I did indicate at that time that in the very near future, we were going to have some further, what I called at that time, real discussions on what the future of the fire station facilities were going to be. And I think I even indicated at that time, and I've said publicly before, that we certainly don't anticipate that we're going to be shoveling the ground on any project within the next 5 years. But even if that was the case, if 5 years was the mark as of today, this is a conversation that really needs to start to happen now. As I was doing the research on the existing fire headquarters, that was a 5-year process. From the time they started talking about it until the time they actually cut the ribbon, it was 5 years. So I think that's realistic now. One of the challenges that I think we have with these particular with the particular buildings is we have many more questions that are asked of us than we have answers. And I'll let the police chief, speak to the police stations, but I think that he's in the same boat. Common questions that I get all the time as I talk to citizens around the community, what's happening to the West Street station? When's that station going to be replaced? What's happening with this? What's happening with that? And they're really questions that I don't know the answer to, because it's still in some respects part of a more global plan that we really haven't talked about yet. So, but some of the answers to the questions as far as expansion, renovation, building new, we don't have the expertise, to figure that out. So we're going to need some outside help to figure that out. But what I don't want to happen is I don't want to sit around for the next couple of years and kind of conceptually talk about what we think may happen to then eventually commission a study and then figure out that what we've been talking about for the last couple of years isn't going to work. Because the age of some of the buildings that we're talking about, I have my own opinions in terms of what architects are going to say in terms of renovation versus new, and what can we do with it, what can't we do with it. But I really think we need that outside perspective and that professional help. I know the scope of work was forwarded to the committee, and what you'll notice in the scope of work is there's nothing in here that says we're looking to build a fire station or a police station next year. What we're talking about is really trying to narrow down, looking at what we have, and what can we do with all three of them, and what is the possibilities with them. One of the things that I want to kind of make clear tonight, because it's been asked and it's a great question, is the renovation work that we've been putting into headquarters over the last couple of years. What's going to happen with that? That work, in my opinion, is not for naught, if that makes sense. In my vision of what I see for future fire facilities is I couldn't ask for better station locations than I have right now. So one of the things that you'll notice that's not in this scope of work is that we're not asking for a consultant to come in to find a site, because I truly believe, at least at headquarters, that an expansion and renovation of what already hasn't been renovated is highly likely and would really be my first choice, because it's a great station location. I really couldn't ask for anything better. So if we had an architect come in and look at headquarters and the answer was, yeah, this has got all kinds of possibilities. We could expand here, we could do this, we could add some bay space, we could add some administration and some training space, but we wouldn't need to do anything with the kitchen or the bunk rooms or any of that, because it's been touched. So I think it's important to understand that we've invested, almost $100,000 over the last couple of years into headquarters, which was much needed and much appreciated. But that work we're not looking to demo in 5 years in the event that something were to move forward. So I think that's important to note. And I said this on Monday. I said this to Ms. Kavanaugh in the committee back then. I think our buildings are in good shape. I think we maintain the buildings. Things have definitely gotten better. With DPW, they do a great job. Our issues are space issues. Where our fire station headquarters was built in 1964, and it was built for a completely on-call department with no staff. And you fast forward, 50 some odd years, we have 35 full-time employees in the building. We're doing, 500 times the call volume we were doing back then. Trucks are larger, but we're still working with the same square footage. We have no adequate meeting space. We have no storage. We have no, the administration space is lacking. Again, the upstairs, we're good. What I envision in terms of some sort of a renovation at headquarters would be bay space and administrative space, and then turning what's currently administrative space into training space and office space. So I think that there is some good potential there. West Street, that's another story. The building was built in 1951. Again, I have my opinions of what architects are going to say about that building. I think that one's going to be a little more difficult.
We know with West Street, that was basically a combination of accommodation and finding something really that we got lucky that we had this spot there, even though it's not perfect. So
absolutely,
we don't even need to go into a discussion on that. Actually, I'm more concerned on hearing and making sure everyone in town hears comments from Chief Slucas on the police station situation, because I know right now, based on your comments, he's got a lot of envy of your setup that you have, because he doesn't have that.
Correct.
For the police. Chief Slucas, a couple of comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Finance Committee. I'll be brief. It is, as Chief Coleman said, we're pretty much in the same boat. It's an issue of space. And, the building, when it was originally constructed, without question, should have been larger than it is. I look at the fire station that they're building now in Leicester. We spent $2 million on this building. Leicester has a volunteer fire department. They don't even have a full-time fire department, and they're spending $8.5 million on their new fire station. We don't have room in the records section to put anything any longer. We don't have room to put records in dead storage anymore. We don't have locker space. I mentioned the other night, there are several members of the department, myself included, that don't have lockers. They don't even have a place to hang in a spare uniform. We've got file cabinets in the kitchen area. We are kind of just bursting at the seams. The building it's just not big enough to adequately meet the needs of today. I don't know what the expansion possibilities would be, which is why I agree with Chief Coleman. We really need to bring in an independent outside third-party consultant that knows what they're doing and knows what they're talking about, who can perhaps float some ideas for us to kick around as a group and see what works and what doesn't work. But that's our primary issue, as well as them, is a severe lack of space.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions from the board on this? Start with Kevin.
Just comment-wise, I agree, Chief. We kicked this all around and had discussions with different folks, and everybody has different opinions as to why the police department ended up where it was and why was it built small on the day, too small the day they opened. But I think without having an outside study, we're just going to keep bantering this about. Having somebody from the outside is key to kind of looking at this from an outside perspective and getting it done. Those spaces, whether it's a public safety building for both or however it comes to be, it should be community spaces as well. I know Chief Slucas has been kind enough to let the Little League, use his community room, but there's points where it's overflowing with stuff in there and he can't always accommodate. So, those in the future, they should have the room to work, but they're community buildings as well. So hopefully, whatever studies come out will point to that as, making it as a community aspect, a facility to utilize. I think the study is the way to go to get this on track.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Kim?
Where did the number come from, the 150,000? That seems like a lot of money for a study.
Sure. We evaluated several municipalities who launched building studies for public safety. Some of them go back to 2008, so we adjusted it percentage-wise because it's, some particular studies were 9 years old. We looked at several studies that were only a year or two old. They ranged anywhere from 70 to 110,000, again, depended on the scope of work. But also some of those studies that were between 70 and 110, it was for one or maybe two buildings. We went with 153 because we thought 50,000 per building was a safe number. And I think I can speak for all of us, including the manager, that 150 is what we're seeking. And if we get bids that are greater than 150, well, then we need to alter the scope of work. But I think what we've looked at with other communities and what they spent on renderings and some rough floor plans and space needs and things like that, we felt 50,000 per building was comfortable.
If I can add in also, in addition to that, and both chiefs did a good job looking at other costs. The other piece of this is, if you're just looking at the fire operations, then you could probably get a reduced rate for 2 facilities because they're just looking at fire. But here we have to look at the operations for police and fire. So it's analyzing the operations of 2 different departments. So I don't think there's going to be any reduction. Maybe, again, I checked with a couple of consultants and they said just in general, $50,000 per facility. Maybe because we have 2 that are fire, there'll be an opportunity to reduce that a little. As we said, we don't have to spend it. If it comes in less, that's great. But that was just a general rule of thumb.
Okay. Kim, anything else?
The scope is very broad because you want to look at your current facilities, see if there's expansion capabilities, but you also want to look at a complex, a public safety complex. Will it be tiered so that if a consultant comes in and says, sure, you can renovate this jury square and do this, and this, and get the space you need, would that negate the need for a complex proposal or looking at a public safety complex?
I'll take it.
So,
Go ahead.
I mean, if you look at number 5 on your scope of work, I'm not sure if you have it in front of you, it says identification of the most beneficial and cost-effective long-term solution. So I think that fits into exactly what you're saying, is that, and I'm not looking for an architect to come in here and say, you need a public safety complex. That's not what I'm looking for. So I think our statement on number 5, where we're looking to identify the most beneficial and cost-effective solution long-term, I would think that would mean a consultant would rate them and say, you can gain your space and gain another 50 years out of a building by adding on some bay space and doing this and doing that at this cost versus building a brand new public safety complex. That's my expectation, that they would rank them based on that number 5 in the scope.
Okay. Kevin and then Ian. Kevin?
Just kind of to Solstrom's question, though. So that number there is a best estimate you're asking for a warrant? I mean, shouldn't we be doing these things, we going out to 3 vendors and getting quotes saying it's going to range from, what if your low bid on this comes back at $210,000? So the 150 doesn't surprise me for that scope of work. What if they come back?
Through the chair, we can't go out to bid without an appropriation in place, but we did check with 1 or 2 consultants that we've worked with before, and they were the ones that provided us the $50,000 per facility figure. So if we were looking at 2 buildings, it would have been 100, 3 buildings, 150. Short of actually going out and getting quotes, we won't know until we go out to bid. We actually have to put a whole bid package together because of the cost of this. So you're under Mass General Law, you don't go out for bid until you've got your appropriation in place to actually pay for what you're bidding.
Okay, and maybe it's just a logistics, or I'm using the wrong terminology, but how do you appropriate an exact amount if you do not know?
It is our best estimate based on what other communities got for actual bids and what various consultants have given us as a ballpark range. Until you actually put it out there, it depends on what time of year you're putting it out there. It depends on how do we further define the scope. There are all these things that would be in the RFP that are going to drive that cost. The best you can do is look at recent RFPs, which is what we did, looked at recent studies. Unfortunately, it happens a lot. Sometimes things come in actually less. And as the chief said, if it came in more, then we would have to go back and revise the scope. So we'd have to go back and actually pull some things out of the scope to keep it within the budget that we're going to be given by town meeting.
But there's a concern in doing that, and it goes back to when I started on this board. I think the construction was in process on the police station, which I don't remember the process that got to that point and those decisions. or lack of decisions on that, and we're living with that now 17 years later. But do we want to limit the scope to fit a budget number, or do we want the best advice we're going to get on this? Now, our board's responsible for making sure the monies are in place or not in place, or we're spending it wisely. Kind of goes back to my first point to Eddie. Hey, look, we've got an extra $24,000 here that's sort of available under the free cash policy. Are we going to be penny wise, pound short, whatever that expression is? And trust me, 150 grand seems like a hell of a lot of money to me, but I would rather get a really darn good report that we can rely on, especially to move forward with something for the police, certainly sooner rather than later, find out what the hell's going on there. Then if we're going to spend an extra 10 grand on this, I mean, should we be strategizing a little better? Because we're going to go back to town meeting for funding, and will free cash be available for us to do that later in the year or later in the fiscal year? Comments?
Let me try to wrap my arms around this. And that's a good question. Julie is right. We couldn't put this thing out to bid until we knew we have a vote by town meeting that appropriates these funds. Because there's a lot of work that goes into the bids, and there's a cost associated with it. So you can't do it in advance because we don't have the money to do that. But if the 150 should come in short, whatever the value that may be, whether it be 5,000, 10, we'd have to make a decision at that point in time, either A, to go back to town meeting and ask for an amendment or a supplemental appropriation to make that work, or we could devise the RFP where there may be some alternate bids that we would be allowed to kind of cherry pick and decide what we want to do. And if it comes in short, if it comes in 125, whatever balance is remaining in that account will close out to free cash once that scope of services is complete and a report is provided. We could also go back to the Finance Committee and take a sum of money, however small that may be, or large it may be, out of the reserve account. I mean, that's something that we would have to take a look at once that final number is known. But I hate to dilute the scope of services in order to make it fit, to your point, Mr. Chairman, and do really a disservice to the town because we're not getting the information that we were looking for in that original scope.
Through the chair, we had a similar situation with a couple of items at the library. If I recall, it was both the roof and the carpet. We had received some estimates, which are the best you can do without actually getting a bid. And we got the estimates, and when we actually went out to get the actual written quotes in the bid, it came in far more than we originally were told. And unfortunately, we had to come back and make some shifts of funds, go back to town meeting, so it took a little bit longer to even get this thing done. I hope that with the 150, there's a little bit of a cushion. Again, thinking $50,000 a building, I'm thinking 2 of the buildings are under the operations of the fire department. A lot of this study is studying their operations to see what their operational needs are. So if 2 of the buildings have the same operations or similar, that might cut down on that overall cost, and then the police would be a standalone. So maybe you'd even come in a little under. But like Eddie said, when you put an RFP together, you could put add deducts in it and just put different items in that we would like to have, but it's not necessary to have, and therefore if the funding is available, you can actually do that.
Okay. Ian, question?
Kim asked it already.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, all set. Good. Any other questions? Great questions. And by the way, I still think it's a lot of money, but I'm just concerned where we really truly have an extra $24,000. I would hate to be whacking the reserve account because we've got no way to get access to that other 24. That's going to go to free cash if we don't otherwise bring it over, right? I mean, we couldn't park that in stabilization with an earmark for this if necessary.
I think if we thought 150 was not going to be adequate, we would have chewed into a portion of that additional 24. So right now, we have every reason to believe the 150 would be sufficient enough to meet the scope that has been provided. And, you know, I guess the market dictates at the time you go out, you know, what that's going to be. But I think based upon some of the information that the chief has received, we believe 150 is going to be enough.
Okay. Okay.
Question? Yep. There's 50,000 for roof repairs at the PD in this capital budget, correct? Are we moving forward with that because we have to do that this year?
Through the chair, if I could turn to DPW Director Bill Coyle for a minute and actually work with the chief on that, because I think he just got some information on that a couple of days ago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's a project we do plan on moving forward with. We're probably going to be modifying the scope relative to what repairs are going to occur to the roof, but because it is a town facility, we do feel as though repairs are needed. I did meet with the architect just as recently as yesterday to discuss some of the modifications to the scope of work, which I'll be sitting down with the chief probably next week sometime to talk to him about them. But we do want to move forward with him just to protect the town's asset. Just on a side note, I'm hopeful that it'll be less than the 50,000 though. Thank you.
We are too.
I'm just concerned about
Yeah, well, it leads into a
spending
question I have.
more
How
money
soon are
on-
we going out, assuming this passes, how soon are we going out to bid for this study?
If this past town meeting in October, it probably takes a good 4 weeks to put a good RFP together. It's got to go through legal counsel. It actually has advertising requirements because of the amount with the central register, so that adds several weeks. You're probably talking January
Okay.
to put it out.
Okay.
But I agree, this is something that we've discussed. We're looking ahead at all of the long-term capital needs of these facilities, and that has to be taken into consideration when making a decision. If you keep those buildings, you add on to the buildings, you renovate it, you continue to put money in. I know with regard to the roof, it's causing some other problems that are going to end up costing money if we don't address the roof. So even if we're looking at not doing something for 5 years, in the next 5 years, if we don't do something with the roof, it's causing problems, or like I should say, the HVAC system is actually causing some of the roof problems too. So we've applied for grants for the HVAC system 3 times now at the state level, and the payback is so long on it because it's a very expensive item. We haven't been approved, but we'll keep looking for alternate sources. We always do.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, final comments, enough comments?
Motion to recommend.
second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed, so voted. Thank you. Chief Coleman, I think we're all set. I think we have 2 more articles for Chief Slucas. So
Thank you very much for your support.
Good to see you. Have a good night. Let's see. So that was Article 14. And Article 15, to see if town meeting will vote to appropriate $30,000 from general fund revenues to replace the backup radio at the water tower site by the police chief. Chief, any comments on that? I know this is, replaced both systems if this is approved now?
This is to replace the money that we already had appropriated to replace the backup radio with the water tower. However, our primary repeater went down, and within a week our secondary repeater went down, and it cost us over $30,000 to replace those, to have communications. So we used that money, and this is to replace that money to now replace the backup system that's at the water tower on Leicester Street.
Any questions?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed, so voted. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.